Hello, and welcome. My name is Herman Jarl, and I'm a game developer. I've got a degree in game design and have been working in the industry for a couple of years. Currently though, I'm working on my biggest solo project ever, a childhood dream project of mine, Titanic, Untitled. So, it doesn't really have a name yet, but that'll come eventually. So this is my first ever development log about this project, and if you've been following the channel for a while, thanks for 1100 subscribers by the way. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I'm working on the Titanic project, but I've been kinda cryptic about it, as I didn't really know where to take it. But in this video I'll be giving a lot more details. Okay, so I'll try to keep this short, but why Titanic? Well, Titanic is a story that has always fascinated me. I know it sounds a little grotesque to say that I'm fascinated by such a horrible tragedy, but I guess the initial interest for me as a kid was that this grand and beautiful ship that once roamed the sea was now just lying on the bottom of the ocean, just fading away over time. And I've always been fascinated with how man-made objects gets overtaken by nature eventually. But as I grew older, I started looking at the story in the way that it in many ways should be viewed, as a tragedy. And this tragedy is something I've always wanted to shine my own light on. You can call it my contribution in keeping the story of Titanic alive. So, I've decided I'm going to make a game/interactive documentary about the whole story. Now, the documentary aspect is easy enough, but my issue was always how I'm going to make it interactive and at the same time tell the story that I want. The idea has changed frequently over these past months, but I think I landed on something that I want to do and something that will be interesting for others to experience. Me and my girlfriend recently played The Quarry and Until Dawn. For those of you who don't know, these are basically interactive horror movies, and I really fell in love in the way these games tell a story while letting the player interact and change the narrative in some way. So, what I want to do is to make an interactive documentary following characters on the Titanic in a similar way that these games did. Obviously, as this is a real-life story of tragedy, I need to be careful and treat this real-life story with respect. So the characters that the user can control are all going to be fictional. It's important to me that this game would not let you change the outcome of the story, only the outcome of these fictional characters. Anyways, let's get into some development. The past few days, I've been working on the first gameplay elements of the project, controlling a submersible ROV, or remotely operated vehicle. To me, one of the most fascinating aspects of the story is the shipwreck, so I knew I wanted to have a sequence in the game which takes place underwater, at the wreck site, and the player has the ability to explore the wreck by themselves. So, I'm using Unreal Engine 5, and I started out by making a little level to prototype in. Once I had some walls and rooms to play around with, I started making the ROV itself. I'm just blocking it out with some cubes for now. After that, I started working on the inputs I wanted to use. I'm also adding a third-person camera system, so the player has the ability to rotate freely around the submersible. I'm using a spring arm with a camera attached to it, and I'm making the spring arm rotate by using the control rotation. I had some issues with the movement, as programming is not really my main cup of tea. I'm more of a visual design kind of guy, but programming is real fun, at least when it works. Even simple things such as what is forward on the ROV and how do I move in that direction confuse me for some reason. Even though I programmed movement like 100 times before, I always seem to forget. Next, I added an arrow to showcase where the camera was looking, as originally I wanted the ROV to move towards the way the camera is facing, but as I started to develop it, I realized how stupid that idea was. The player wants to look around while moving, usually at least, so eventually I scrapped that. I wanted the movement of the ROV to be realistic and natural, but at the same time feel good to control. Essentially, I was programming what one of those remote-controlled cars would feel like, with the joystick and everything. But this means that I wouldn't be able to just move horizontally, as most Submersible don't really have that option. In my system, acceleration will always move the ROV forward in the direction it's facing. So, to change direction, the player has to rotate the ROV itself. For some spice, I added a spotlight. Next was the movement up and down. Now, I'm still a little uncertain on how I want this to be, as I realized from my references that ROVs can actually move vertically without tilting, but visually it looks better when it's tilting in the direction it's moving. But eventually I will come back to change this. I added some basic collisions so I can bump into things, which is always fun. The next thing I did was creating a simple system so I can change between first person and third person cameras. The two cameras needed some differences though, as when I'm moving in first person it can get really disorientating when the camera rotates. I bought a Mir 2 Submersible, which I've used in cinematics before, and I placed it into my level as I wanted to experiment a bit with the cable and how the ROV is attached to it. I want the cable to be a big part of the exploration aspect, so the player has to be careful not to tangle it up. Eventually I will also make it so that the ROV has a maximal travel range based on how much cable is used. This would also help to keep the player where I want them, so they don't travel to areas they're not supposed to. Now, as you can see, realistic cable physics is not really built into Unreal by default, so after researching a bit, I realized I need another plugin to get the physics I'm after, but as of now I'm just gonna stay with this cable. So now I went back to the up-down system and I changed it to be more like a hover-like effect, but I added a smalt tilt to it just to visualize the movement a bit better. You have to make some creative changes in games so the player can get a better understanding of what's happening on their screen, even though it might not be 100% realistic. I also wanted to add a small tilt when the ROV moves left and right. Now, this process was a little bit of a challenge for me, as I had to detect velocity in a way I haven't done before. And as you can see, I got some interesting results in the beginning. After researching a bit, I tried combining the right vector with the current velocity. And then I took those two vectors and I plugged them into a dot product. Which honestly I have no idea what does, but hey, it works. And now it's really starting to feel good to control. For some visual flair, I added a bubble particle system which activates and deactivates based on if you're moving or not. Unreal Engine's particle system is amazing. The only problem is I have no idea how it works. I just tweak knobs and press buttons until I get a decent result. And we got bubbles. By adjusting the spring arm length, I added the ability to zoom in and out while in third person mode. If the player is in first person mode, this works more like a regular camera zoom. I have no idea why I did this or if it's even gonna be necessary, but it's so easy to set up, I just wanted to see what it will feel like. What we have now works really well for prototyping, and I spent a lot of time just cruising around with this thing. These are the times when development is really fun. I've been controlling this cube all day, so I decided to get something more interesting to control. So I went over and bought a model from TurboSquid. The ROV I went for is based on a real life one and it looks really cool. The only issue is that it would not be used at the depths of where Titanic is. it will crumble in microseconds. But it looks cool, and I will eventually change it anyway. What I realized with this new model is that the right and left tilt is way too powerful, and it looks really odd, so that has to change in the future. Now that I have a really good prototype, I want to test it out in a more interesting environment, the wreck site. Now, what you see here is obviously not finished in any way, but it's still really intriguing to just cruise around the wreck. I would like to thank you all for watching, and hopefully it was somewhat entertaining. Now, this was just a little fun break for me, as I've been modeling and texturing a lot in the past months, and the ROV turned out good. It still needs some tweakings, but it works for testing. As you can probably tell, this is my first ever development log. It's even my first commentary video, but I plan on doing many more, so I would really appreciate any feedback. And if you find any of this interesting, feel free to subscribe. Maybe even leave a comment if you have some questions or tips for me. Again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.